The slave's revolt in morality begins when resentment itself becomes creative and gives birth to values. A resentment experienced by those who, deprived as they are of the proper outlet of action, are forced to obtain their satisfaction in imaginary acts of vengeance. While all aristocratic morality springs from a triumphant affirmation of its own demands, the slave morality says no to what is outside itself, different from itself, and not itself. And this no is its creative act. This about-face in the perspective of judgment, this irresistible gravitation to the objective instead of back to the subjective, is typical of resentment. An external and objective world, to employ physiological terminology, is vital to slave morality. It requires objective stimuli to be capable of action at all. Its action is fundamentally a reaction. The contrary is the case when we come to the aristocrat's system of values. It acts and grows spontaneously. It merely seeks its antithesis in order to utter a more grateful and exultant yes to its own self. Its negative concept, low, vulgar, bad, is merely a pale image formed afterwards compared to its positive and fundamental concept, saturated as it is with life and passion. We the noble, we the good, we the beautiful, we the happy. The outrages committed against reality by the aristocratic system of morality are limited to that particular sphere with which it is not sufficiently acquainted, and of which it disdains to learn. In some instances, it misjudges the sphere which it despises, the sphere of the vulgar and the lowly. On the other hand, due weight should be given to the consideration that in any case the mood of contempt, of disdain, of superciliousness, even on the supposition that it falsely portrays the object of its contempt, will always be far removed from that degree of falsity which will always characterize the attacks, in effigy, of course, of the vindictive hatred and vengefulness of the weak in onslaughts on their enemies. In point of fact, there is in contempt too great an admixture of nonchalance, of casualness, of boredom, of impatience, even of a feeling of joy, for it to be capable of distorting its victim into a real caricature or a real monstrosity. Attention again should be paid to the almost benevolent nuances with which, for instance, the Greek nobility graces all the words by which it distinguishes itself from the common people. Note how these words are always imbued with sympathy, care, and consideration, and thus sweetened, until finally almost all the words which refer to the vulgar man survive as expressions for unhappy, pitiable. And how, conversely, bad, low, unhappy have never failed to resound in the Greek ear with a tone in which unhappy is the dominant note. This is a heritage of the old noble aristocratic system of morality, which remains true to itself even in contempt. The well-born simply felt themselves to be the happy. They did not have to manufacture their happiness artificially by contemplating their enemies, or convince themselves of their happiness by lying to themselves, as all men of resentment are prone to do. And similarly, complete men as they were, full of energy and, of course, therefore active, they were too wise to dissociate happiness from action. Activity is, in their minds, an essential part of happiness, all in sharp contrast to the happiness of the weak and the oppressed, with their festering venom and malignity, among whom happiness manifests itself essentially as a narcotic, an anesthetic, peace and quiet, a Sabbath, tranquility of the mind and relaxation of the body. In short, purely a passive phenomenon, while the aristocratic man lives confidently and is open to himself. The man of resentment, on the other hand, is not sincere or naive, neither honest nor candid with himself. His soul squints, his mind loves dark corners, secret passages and hidden doors. Everything covert appeals to him as his world, his security, his comfort. He is a past master of silence, of not forgetting, of patience, of assuming a mode of self-deprecation and humility for a while. A race of such resentful men will eventually prove more cunning than any aristocratic race. They will respect cunning to a much greater degree, namely as something most vital to existence, whereas cunning among aristocratic men is apt to be redolent of luxury and refinement. So among them, it does not play so integral a part as that complete certainty of function of the governing unconscious instincts, nor is that certain lack of caution, such as a valiant charge at the enemy, bravery in the face of danger, or as those ecstatic bursts of rage, love, reverence, gratitude, by which at all times noble souls have recognized each other. When the resentment of the aristocratic man manifests itself, it is consumed and exhausted in an immediate reaction, and consequently instills no venom. On the other hand, it never manifests itself at all in countless instances when it would be inevitable for the feeble and weak. The inability to take seriously for any length of time their enemies, their disasters, their misdeeds, is the sign of the strong, magnificent individuals who possess a superabundance of power which is agile, yielding, but which also heals injuries and allows one to forget. Such a man shakes off, with a simple shrug, many a worm which would have dug its way into another. It is only in characters such as these that we see the possibility, supposing, of course, that there is such a possibility in the world, of the real love of one's enemies. What respect for his enemies is found, indeed, in an aristocratic man, and such a respect is then a bridge to love. He insists on having his enemy to himself, as his distinction. He will have no enemy but a man in whose character there is nothing to despise and much to honour. On the other hand, imagine the enemy as the man of resentment conceives him, and it is here exactly that we see his work, his creativeness. He has conceived the evil enemy, the evil one, and indeed that is the inspiration from which he now concocts, as a counterpart, the good one, himself, his very self.